You probably remember the shock of walking into a grocery store and seeing this. Aisles that usually hold thousands of products completely stripped bare. But those moments stand out exactly because they are the exception. Most of the time, the global food network operates as a highly tuned engine designed to move products incredibly fast while keeping prices at an absolute minimum. To pull that off, retailers use just-in-time logistics. Instead of paying to store extra pallets of pasta or cereal in large backroom warehouses, supermarkets schedule delivery trucks to arrive the exact moment the items on the floor run out. Those empty shelves represent the calculated trade-off of a system that prioritizes rock-bottom consumer prices over the high cost of holding extra idle inventory. If a microchip factory faces a supply delay, managers can simply pause the assembly line. But agricultural production is driven by biology. You cannot hit pause on a growing crop, and you certainly cannot fast-forward a harvest to cover a sudden shortage. Economists call this the stickiness of supply. Because commodities like wheat or corn take months to mature, farmers are locked into production cycles. They cannot instantly adjust their output to meet sudden spikes in consumer demand. Moving further down the chain, processing these raw materials, especially meat, requires a massive concentration of physical labor inside specialized packing facilities. The physical constraints of farming and the dense labor requirements of processing create an inherently rigid system. When a sudden geopolitical or health crisis strikes, the network lacks the flexibility to bend and absorb the impact, causing it to simply fracture. Not all food shortages happen the same way. Different commodities break down through entirely different failure pathways when the global system is stressed. Take grains, for example. They can be stored for long periods, which should make them stable. However, their production is highly geographically concentrated, meaning a massive portion of the world's calories flow through a handful of key global export routes. This map tracks how a localized disruption infects the world. When a conflict hits a grain-producing region, neighboring countries impose export bans, starving reliant nations. These trade freezes simultaneously choke off crucial fertilizer, destroying future crop yields beyond the initial conflict zone. Meat and fresh produce have the opposite problem. They are hyper-perishable, which means they require continuous, uninterrupted operational capacity to move from farm to fridge before spoiling. If illness hits the labor force, physical factories remain entirely intact, but processing halts immediately. Without workers on the line, production capacity shuts down overnight. Decades of extreme operational specialization mean that knocking out a single critical node, whether that is a key shipping route for wheat or the labor pool at a regional packing plant, paralyzes the entire chain. Following these disruptions, it's common to expect food companies to build in inherent resilience, holding massive inventories and maintaining backup factories just in case. Comparing two operating models, running a factory at full capacity yields high profitability in a competitive industry. Conversely, maintaining idle backup lines creates a severe financial deficit. Companies cannot absorb this. They must transfer these backup costs to consumers, drastically raising food prices. Relying on smaller, regional networks introduces a different vulnerability: localized risk. When a single county faces a flood or a pest outbreak, a local system has no distant suppliers to tap into. These smaller entities lack a deep financial reserves needed to suddenly source and transport goods from thousands of miles away when their home base fails. In contrast, large, globalized supply chains often rebound faster from shocks. Their scale allows them to lean on diversified supplier networks and physically reroute shipping containers around blockages in ways a local hub simply cannot. Private companies deliberately run lean and underinvest in safety buffers because the free market severely punishes the high costs of redundancy. When the private market refuses to pay for idle buffers, governments often step in with aggressive policies designed to mandate resilience. A common intervention is subsidizing the entry of small, redundant processing plants. But once the crisis passes, these smaller facilities lack the economies of scale to compete against the aggressive low pricing of giant incumbents, making their long-term survival unlikely. This graph illustrates the macroeconomic impact of forced localization. As governments mandate reshoring supply chains domestically, losing international specialization causes overall economic output to shrink. A second line reveals a corresponding spike in manufacturing inflation. By forcing companies to source inputs locally, production costs soar. Aggressive government intervention to force domestic production removes the cost savings of global trade. The result is a system that might be harder to break, but one that bakes significantly higher costs into every grocery receipt. Instead of trying to rewire global economics, a more viable solution exists at the micro level. Communities can build what economists term absorptive capacity by proactively creating and maintaining regional food buffer stocks to weather short-term delays. At the same time, households that diversify where they buy their food, splitting purchases between supermarkets, from local producers, and independent grocers, prevent a catastrophic loss of access when a single mega retailer struggles with deliveries. True resilience in our food system ultimately comes down to a conscious societal choice. We have to either accept the hidden risks and occasional empty shelves of a hyper-efficient network, or willingly pay the permanent financial burden of redundant safety buffers.